everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. Corey began his journey 21 years ago at the age of 25. Since then, he's lived mostly in stealth and integrated into male culture undetected. He worked as an automotive mechanic for 10 years before beginning his spiritual journey on the Appalachian Trail in 2011. That adventure taught him a lot about strength and being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. He's been happily married for 10 years with 2 beautiful daughters who accept him as their father. Corey believes life is what you make it and has made his life's work to evolve and manifest himself into what he calls a superhuman. Everybody, welcome to the show, Corey.
How you doing, Emily? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being here, for being willing to join us and share your story.
Absolutely.
First off, for the record, to put it all on the table there, how do you identify?
So I identify as he, him, his. I identify as a father and a husband.
Nice. I love it. And from our pre-interview, I know there's more to that, and I can't wait to dive into the other aspects of that you're not quite sharing yet. This is great. This is the time where I get to get out my tools and mine all that information. As we jump into your story, my favorite question to start with is, how did you choose your name?
So it's funny. So people ask me this a lot of the times, and I wish I had an amazing story to share. It kind of literally just came to me one day, and it just felt right. I don't have any groundbreaking discoveries or connections to my name. My journey started a long time ago. It's sometimes hard to remember back to 2001 when my head was in the clouds. To think of something to me being so simple as a name. I know that it's not so simple, but it just came to me one day and it felt right. And I went with it, and I never looked back since.
That's awesome. And, one of the things that we'll say here during this episode, I know because of some of the points we talked about in the pre-interview, but just on the show in general, that every story is valid. And that's what we're here to show, is that our journeys are all different. There are a lot of similarities, but there's nothing in your journey that's invalid because it's your journey. So in choosing your name, there's absolutely nothing invalid there either. As a TikTok creator, you actually have two names. You go by Goose Caboose there on TikTok, Goose Caboose 2011, correct?
That is correct.
Where does that name come from? And what special meaning does that hold for you?
It has a meaning, right? I didn't just pull it out of the air. So some of the people that follow me, I can't see anybody other than you. Mm-hmm. So I don't know who's here. I don't know who knows me off of TikTok. I have shared this story before. So in 2011, I hiked the Appalachian Trail, right? And when you're on a long distance hiking trail, you are given what's called a trail name, okay? And people refer to you by that trail name, not by your birth or chosen name. So I was always the guy hiking in the front of the pack, right? And if you know how geese fly, they fly in formation like a V, right? Mm-hmm. And the goose that's in the front is called the point goose. Okay. And so for a while I was point goose. But then after a while, it became too long to say, and people just shortened it to goose. And 2011 is the year that I hiked the Appalachian Trail. And caboose is just something my kids came up with because it rhymed with goose. And it was fun.
Nice. And if you're any of the other geese in it, then the Goose Caboose is all you're looking at the entire time, I suppose.
That's right.
So let's do a quick audit of the chat and see if we can find out who is here that knows you. We've got Emmy the Unicorn is a name I'm not familiar with, so that might be part of your squad. Songs of Love and Healing is somebody who is, I think, from Jeannie's squad that's here. T Solarity K says Goose with 3 exclamation points, so they know you. Jeannie, of course. Let's see who else.
Is there an Emily in there?
I'm assuming that would be the Emmy, right? I thought, yeah, Emmy the unicorn, probably.
That makes sense.
Yeah, she would be a unicorn.
She would be a unicorn.
Spacey Marie knows you. Spacey's I think a recent joiner of ours, and that's about it. If you know Corey and want a shout out, please put it Ronson 70 age, Elhun 1901. There's a Kevin. No, I think these are from the previous show. So I think I've gone back too far. So if you would like a shout out to Corey so that he knows you're here, go ahead and put it in the chat, and I will try and catch that. Let's go ahead and dive back into your story. So when did you first realize you were trans, but when did transgender, that term, apply to you? When did you understand that was who you were?
I actually answered this question today to somebody on a live. So for me, I always felt like something was just off, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was raised and acclimated into society as a girl, and I presented as such. And so I liked girls, so I must be a lesbian. It made the most sense. I grew up in a very upper-class conservative area, especially in the early 2000s, when I feel like the LGB community was finally being seen as a way of life. It was normalized, and the transgender community wasn't really visible at all, actually, that I could remember. It wasn't until I actually moved out of my parents' house in New York State, and I moved to Western Massachusetts to be with a girl, right? And she brought me to the campus Pride Center. And after we left there, she had asked me, so what did you think of so-and-so? And I was like, I don't know, he's fine. He's like a regular dude, right? And she's like, no, well, he is a transgender man. And I was like, what is that? What is that? I don't know what that means. She explained it to me, and I was like, what? That's a thing? That's a thing? I was like, holy crap. This is like the last puzzle piece right here. It made the most sense. It literally made everything in my life make sense at that very moment. I actually remember that moment. I was sitting in the car in the parking lot. We hadn't left the campus yet. And I was like, my world like just opened up completely. So that was the first time that I actually understood and actually heard the term transgender. Mm-hmm. And that was probably in like 2000 and late 90s, to be fair, late 90s. And it was at that moment that I was just like, this is me. This is what I have to do. This is what I have to do. And I went from there.
Wow. So there's your egg crack moment, and it sort of didn't even crack; it just exploded. And when was it? How long after that did you actually start transitioning?
So, I feel like I began. So I have a unique story because I feel like a lot of people aren't offered this opportunity, in the fact that I was able to literally pick up my life and move someplace where nobody knew me and basically start completely over. I didn't have to worry about transitioning at work or at school or anything like that. I just blend right in, right? And that it was probably year and a half, 2 years after that, first realization that I began to socially transition. So I was always very like masculine presenting, but you could still tell that I was just like a typical lesbian, as they would call it, right? Butch lesbian. Because every time I started to talk, people just knew because of my voice, and I had obvious girl parts and stuff like that, and it was amazing to be able to be seen for the first time as a man. And then I looked further. It was difficult. It was difficult to medically transition in the early 2000s. It's definitely not anywhere near what it is like today, which is relatively easy. I don't want to say it's like easy because I know it's not easy for everybody, but compared to how it was, like the steps that you had to take in order to medically transition were a lot more intensive than they are today. I had to see a therapist, not any kind of therapist, had to be a gender therapist. They had to follow what was called the Harry Benjamin Standards of Care, which is now WPATH. And I needed to basically, in order to medically transition, I had to clock so many hours in therapy, and I had to have lived as the opposite gender for, I think it was like a minimum of 2 years.
Wow.
To qualify to be able to get a referral to go see a doctor to get testosterone. And when I did that, I had to. There weren't doctors that were local to me. I had to actually drive to Boston. So I was in Western Mass. If you know how the state of Massachusetts is shaped, it's basically a rectangle. And I lived on one end, and Boston was on the other. And it's about a 2.5 hour ride. And I would drive. At least once every 2 weeks to Boston to get my testosterone injection, because at the time it had to be performed under the supervision of a doctor, not like today. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I could talk, and I could talk. So you just cut me off and interrupt me if I'm saying too much.
Fair enough. I'll do that. I'm usually pretty skilled at that, unless you're talking about something that's really important and it's pertinent to what we were asking in the question. And it's really tough. It is still very difficult for a lot of people to transition, and what it used to be was really insane that you had to prove for so long that you were living as that before you could actually become that. And it's like, your problems with your voice, that sort of blows me away, that like testosterone, from what I've heard, the people I've interviewed, works very fast. Within 6 months, your voice is deepening. You can grow facial hair, these sort of things. And it's just like, how are you going to blend and be taken seriously as a man without, being able to get the voice and some of these other attributes? It's sort of baffling. I'm glad that we're past that dark ages of transitioning,
absolutely,
and gotten into something a little bit more modern. And now, of course, everybody's pushing back and freaking out and acting like we're taking over the world. But we can keep thinking that, because we really should anyways. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the people. I did see that someone said that I should just introduce them as L. You would know them as just the letter L. And or that's how I should mention them. And Songs of Love and Healing is Elisa. Or Elisa.
Oh, okay. Yep, I know Elisa. Okay. I don't know about L. I don't know if they feel comfortable saying their full name. Is that the same unicorn person?
No, that was and I lost it again. Darn it.
It's okay.
That was the L Hun. I'll find it again.
Whoever it is that knows me, they're probably gonna like
hit
me upside the head after, be like, I can't believe you didn't know who I was.
Yeah, you're letting your fans and your friends down. It's fine. The rest of the chat basically devolved as they got into talking about your beard. Someone mentioned that you said you'd asked about shaving it, and then everybody was saying that that's the only reason that they follow you, or that's the whole.
Yep. They say my beard should have its own TikTok.
So that's okay, and then good. We got some questions coming in. Keep those coming in. I love it. So we're the follow up question that I usually ask, and let's go ahead and stick with it. To when did you learn and identify that you were trans? What were some of the breadcrumbs looking back once that all fell into place? Your egg exploded, and you knew the through line in all of your life. What were some of the key clues that should have pointed you to being transgender when you didn't have that language?
I feel like at a very early age, I never really fit in with the girls. I remember my parents, my mother, trying to set up these play dates with the girls so I could learn how to play and have some girlfriends and do all these girly things, right? And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to go, ride my dirt bike with the boys and go skateboarding, right? And then, of course, you hear things like, oh, well, she's just a tomboy and she just likes to do things like that. They used to use the term rough and tumble, and back in the day, I remember reading that in my gender therapist's letter, a rough and tumble kind of person, right? Because I like to get dirty and do stuff like that. I never felt seen. I never felt seen. It's hard to explain. It's almost like someone is looking at you, but they're looking past you at the same time. It was hard to feel love for anything in my life. I was in constant conflict of not understanding why I was feeling this way. My parents, they took me to therapists, psychiatrists. They did everything to try and help me because I was depressed. I had suicide attempts. I was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital for, to keep me safe, right? And everybody would always ask, well, what is wrong? What is wrong? There's got to be something. And I was like, I just don't know. I don't feel normal. There's something wrong. This is my body, but I feel here. I'm not in, it's separate. This is a shell and I'm on the outside looking in,
Yeah.
And at the time I didn't have the language. I didn't have the language to say my brain doesn't align with my body because, it makes sense now, those are the correct words. But at the time I didn't know that, and if I did, I probably wouldn't even say that out loud because, God forbid, say something taboo in a conservative middle class neighborhood, and people are just like, "What?" Oh my God, there's a gay person that lives down the road. God, it's big deal. So, I could look back. I could look back on my past, my upbringing. I can't even talk. My upbringing, and I could see everything that at the time was very confusing for me that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
I could even talk about relationships that I've had with men, right? And thinking to myself, I guess this is what girls do, right? You have sex with guys, right? This is what all the girls in school are doing. So I tried it and I was like, this is really odd and it doesn't feel normal and natural. And I was like, and it was boring. I was like, this is boring. Right? I was like, he's obviously getting something from it, but what about me? Right?
Yeah,
so,
and just the general assumption is that this is what life is for others. I'm weird, and I'm not getting something, but this is what it's supposed to be. So this is what
exactly.
I should try and be. I love a lot of what you said in that. It's a sort of a perfect description for our cis friends and even the cis people that aren't our friends, of what it means to be trans, that just complete disconnect and not understanding why, but feeling like everything is just off and wrong. I also loved,
Yeah.
we talked before the show that we're very close to the same age. I mean, we're the same age. We're just very, very close, very, very close to being,
months.
yeah, months apart. And you mentioned not being able to let it slip that you were gay back in those days. My perspective, I remember, like, there were people in the public sphere that sort of everybody knew were gay, but like nobody talked about it. It wasn't like publicly out. Like even Elton John, from what I remember being a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, was like, everybody thought he was gay, but no one like ever like talked about it. And like, it wasn't something public. It was just this weird thing of like, we knew all these people were, or suspected they were, but nobody was talking about it. So yeah, I mean, being gay was that. Trans wasn't even a thing. You would see like the people who would get sex changes or whatever would be on the trash talk shows, but that was as deep as it got. So,
right. Those were the images that people had in their minds. You know, Jerry Springer, Circus Freaks. You know, Rocky Horror Picture Show, things like that. You know, Silence of the Lambs. You know, and we never had positive representation, and I feel like we're getting there. We do have some positive representation on the celebrity level, but I still feel like we have a long road to go.
yeah, and there's two things about that. One, there aren't a ton of good positive role models that are getting good press. You know, we've got Leah Thomas right now that is swimming and is gaining notoriety there, but there's so much backlash against her and her journey that it's like, it's great to see that for our trans youth out there, but you know, when the entire world is turning on her so much, it's like, it's sort of almost worse in a way. You know, we have so many of our own internalized fears of what it would be to come out and all of that. And, you know, are we valid? And when you just see that kind of public backlash, I can't imagine what that does to you internally about your courage to come out and talk about yourself in the terms of somebody that's so derided currently. So, yeah, again, a lot of really good points for our allies and friends about what it truly means to be trans and why it's so hard for us growing up and coming out. Was there a period, you mentioned your egg cracking. Was there a period where you had to come to terms and learn to accept the fact that you were trans? Did you struggle with that in any way, or was that just such a relief for you to hear and to be able to connect those dots that it was just like, let's go?
That was basically it. Once I realized that, I felt like I was in survival mode in a way, right? I was like full steam ahead. I had no support. Nothing was advertised as like what's it called? Like a guidebook. There was no guidebook. There was no. I didn't have any other trans people to look up to or to help, to guide me. You know, I was doing a lot of like just looking and just like calling random doctors on my own, and having to basically, you know, share my story to each of these doctors, and hopefully one of them will accept me and take me on, you know, as a patient, you know. But yeah, I mean, my experience was just very much like, as soon as I realized that what I had to do, I have a strong personality type of being, my wife likes to say I'm very impulsive, and like, when I get something in my head, I will not let it drop until I fulfill it. Okay. And it's not just my transition. It's like across the board, everything in my life. So for me, it was a relief. It was definitely a relief, and just had to be done.
You mentioned earlier that you were able to change towns and kind of go through a lot of this in your own safe space where you were writing the story as it was happening. Was there, I know there were some areas where you did need to come out and, tell people that you were transgender and were going to be transitioning. How did you approach that? And was there a method that you used in a lot of cases, or, what were some of the different ways that you used to come out to the people that you knew?
So at the time, I was living in a very, fortunately, I was living in a very accepting town in Western Massachusetts called Northampton, Massachusetts. They basically call it like the gay mecca of the state, almost like a false reality, because the real world doesn't actually work this way. That happened in this town. Like the mayor of the town was a lesbian. Everybody was gay. It was like a gay heaven, right? Everybody. And
Nice.
I never, I was very, it's so funny. So I'm not on TikTok. So I feel like I could say things that I wouldn't normally be able to say on TikTok because I would get like blocked immediately.
You are on TikTok. Genius streaming.
Well, anyway, so one of the words I wasn't allowed to say on TikTok was DYKE. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And that was like a flag for TikTok. And I said it one time and I got like taken down, whatever. I was, back in the day, that was like, people used that word with pride. They used it with pride. They're like, I'm a proud that, right? And so I was one of those. I was one of those. And I feel like a lot of women in the lesbian community at the time, and I'm sure there's still many out there today, would often say things to me like, we're losing all of our butch lesbians to the trans community. And it was personal to them. It was personal. It's true. It's true. And, there's a lot of die-hard lesbians out there also who are like, I only date women. And you should only date women if you're a lesbian. And if you call yourself a lesbian and then you go and you date a man, then you're a fraud, right? So I was actually nervous to come out to some of my friends, and a lot of people I didn't, because the town that I lived in is very much a transient town of college students. Okay, so people come and go every like 2 to 4 years, and I feel like the hardest person that I had to come out to were my parents. I come from a very conservative Jewish family with a long lineage in, the Holocaust and all of this stuff, right? My father's a pharmacist. I got pharmacists in my family, people who understand what taking hormones does to the body. And I wrote them a long email first because I knew that I would not be able to say everything that I wanted to say if I was right in front of them, because I'm very in tune with people's like body language and reactions when I'm saying things to them. So I was able to write them an email. I gave them a week. I followed up with them. I didn't talk to my parents for probably like a good year. Okay. It took about 10 years for my parents to take down the old pictures on the walls in my house and use the proper name and pronouns. It took them a long time, but they finally came around, and we are closer than ever now, as I am with my two brothers. I have an older brother and a younger brother. Long-winded answer, Emily.
Well, see, the thing is sometimes I will let you go because you are not only answering the question that I asked, but then you'll answer the follow-up question. So it's just like, I'll just let you keep going. It's fine.
I took two out.
Yeah, because after asking, what were some of the techniques you used for coming out, we talk about how successful those were, and then who was your most difficult to come out. One of the things I love to talk about here on the Transverse in general and with our community is the idea of patience. And it sounded like that was something you learned very strongly with your parents, and the fact that it took 10 years. What is your perspective now on the patience needed and involved in transitioning?
The patience in transitioning? Yeah. Another great question. Another question that I get asked a ton of, like, how long is it going to take for me to grow facial hair? How long did it take you to do this? How long before this happens? And my answer is, it's called a journey for a reason, right? And in a journey, it's not always going to be easy, and it's hard. It's really effing hard, because the decisions that you make in your life, as in order to be happy and successful, affect the lives of other people as well. And that was a really hard concept for me to grasp, because I always grew up very close to my family, and I knew that they were struggling and were uncomfortable with it, because it's like a domino effect, right? So I go home to see my parents. I go out to lunch with my parents. When I eat lunch with my parents run into friends, and their friends are like, "How is your daughter doing?" And my parents say, "My daughter is my son now." And then that opens up a whole new box of questions that my parents now have to field and answer and support. So it takes patience. You have to allow people some grace and time to accept you and find their own way of healing and understanding. Because, as a transgender man with two little girls, I don't think it has anything to do with the fact of being transgender, but I feel like if one of my daughters came to me and told me when they were in their teens or 20s that they felt this way their entire life and they wanted to transition to be a man, of course I would be 100% behind them. But it would be hard, even for me, because those are my children, and I've raised them, and I've known them for X amount of years one way, right? And it's hard, when they're, and I don't mean to be offensive or, to anybody who's listening. I don't want that to come off that way. But, just because we identify and live our life this way doesn't mean that we're immune to things that you would think we wouldn't be. It's hard for anybody, switching pronouns, names, seeing somebody completely in a gender that you hadn't seen before. It's hard. It's an adjustment, and it's a learning curve for a lot of people. And I don't need people to agree with me. I don't need people to accept me. I just need people to show me the same amount of respect that I show them.
Thank you so much for all of those wonderful points. I love, that perspective of, even though that you're a transgender parent, and have that perspective, that then if your daughters came to you and identified as something else, there's an adjustment period for you. I think there's a really important honesty in that, and I think it gets to the core of that question of the patience in other people. We take so long to develop an understanding of who we are and what all the stuff that's going on in our brains means, so that when we come out, we're ready for it. Like, we've put all the pieces together, we understand it as much as we can, and we get started on the journey. Whereas the parents' perspective, they've spent their entire life trying to keep you alive and trying to steer you in the right direction. And a lot of that comes from societal expectations and their own expectations, and their own understanding of the entire situation, the way the world works, the way the family works, and the way it works for the individual child. So there is a lot of forgiveness that needs to happen in coming out, because it's shifting a lot in someone's brain. It's not as simple as a name and pronouns. There's a lot more that goes into it, and it's not. And you being honest about the fact that you would probably even struggle with that a little bit, to some regard, really helps illuminate that need for that patience and the understanding of their perspective and what they need to be able to get on board. Because I think it's really easy for us to look at our own internalized transphobia, look at the negative reactions of society towards trans folks, and then see our parents kind of rejecting it and just say, the entire world's against me, this is horrible, and be really negative about it. Whereas it's like, no, there are horrible things going on in the world, but my parents are there for me. They just need the time to get up to speed. And anybody would struggle with this idea. So very, very important pieces in that. I did want to kind of go back to something, and it's seeming a little less important now, but it's something that always fires me up here, is the gatekeeping that goes on, particularly within the LGBT and even sometimes in the trans community. Those things like if you're a lesbian, you're supposed to be a gold star lesbian. You got to stick to it. Otherwise, they feel that you've betrayed them, or you're somehow challenging their validity in some way. Are there other aspects or other situations where you've run into that kind of thing, where your identity is somehow within I know the cis community, obviously, but within the LGBT community, where your identity is affecting them in some way from their perspective?
Oh yeah, for sure. Growing up in the lesbian community, it was a community. It was a place where I felt safe. A lot of energy went into my identity. A lot of close friends and family members that I consider. And when I transitioned, in a way, I felt ostracized from the community, because now I'm a man, right? And I pass. And like, why is there a man in my space now? And I feel like my wife could, this resonates with her as well, being somebody who predominantly had dated women in her past, and then being seen as somebody now in a heteronormative relationship to the outside world. I feel like there is definitely this loss of identity for my wife as well, and on the other end of it, so we all we want to do and be seen by society as who we are. So I want to be seen as a man. I want to be accepted into male-only spaces. Yet, for some reason, when I'm in those intimate spaces with men, it feels a little off and uncomfortable. It feels that way because I can't really contribute a lot to the stories they share about growing up as a boy and doing stuff with their dad, right? It's challenging. So I kind of feel like I'm always in this like gray area of like, where do I belong? What are, other than the trans community, where do I fit in? Where do I belong? And yeah, I don't know if my wife, you want to have her speak on her experience of what it was like basically coming out to, we got married. When we got married, my whole family obviously knew about me, but hers did not.
Mm-hmm.
Her family did not know about her father walking me down the aisle, her down the aisle to me. He thought that he was giving his daughter away to a cis man,
Mm-hmm.
And Bethany, I don't know if you want to talk about your experience a little bit about living as a someone who dated women and then dating a man, and how that made you feel in your
He's
identity.
panning me on. Hi, Emily.
Hello. So just so everybody knows, in chat, we were talking in the pre-interview about the potential of bringing Bethany on for some things, probably in a big part in the after and in
Right.
the after show. So
Here I am.
yeah. So welcome to the show, Bethany. So great to have
Thank
you.
Thank you. Gosh, yeah. I mean, he's right. Like half my family didn't, probably most of my family didn't know that when we were getting married that I was marrying a trans man. And part of that, I think, comes from, when we first started dating, like he was very stealth, and he passes very well. Like I don't know if that's you would not really be able to, that wouldn't be the first thing that you thought when you looked at him. So, yeah, I think my family was a little surprised when I started dating a guy. Some of them I told, the ones that I trusted and felt comfortable with. I had a little bit of a tumultuous relationship with my dad. So that was kind of like I was like, I just kind of want him to walk me down the aisle. And I'm afraid if I tell him that part, that maybe he wouldn't, and that would be really heartbreaking. And I also didn't want anybody to see him anything other than who he was. Like, I know that, the way he feels, he just wants people to see him as a man. And I didn't want to make it a thing. I wanted my family to see him like that. And I didn't necessarily trust all of them to be, that gracious. We have since resolved all of that. My entire family is aware. And they've all been wonderful. They've all been really wonderful. I can't really say that it was a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm. But there must have been something, you have to approach them at some point in your youth and say, I'm a lesbian, and come out to them as that. And then you,
So then it kind
have to come out to them as now.
Then it kind of fits the narrative of like, oh, it was just a phase.
Right. Well, I'd say, so I grew up in the South, which was not exactly the most accepting place for, gay people. And my dad was a Methodist minister. So, I just I moved out of the South because I wanted to be in a community that was going to be more accepting of me. Like after I graduated, I moved up to Boston, because they were the first place to legalize gay marriage. Like that was a thing. And I was like, whoa, that's a thing. I can actually be queer in Boston and actually live my life. So I'm going to go move there. See you later, guys. But yeah, I think going back to the point that Corey was making though, like it is a loss of community. I feel like at first, we do have to constantly work at reaching out to other queer people in order to maintain that connection. Because we do appear to be a heterosexual couple. And, that's great and all, but at the same time, it's, there's a little piece of that community that's missing. You want to be able to identify with your friends, in a different way. And so it's work. It takes work.
Well,
to find
that's such a fascinating dynamic. So Corey hit on something that I want to address again in a minute, because it's something that I've been feeling a lot recently, is that the in-between that you get stuck in as a trans person, as you get away from the identity that isn't right for you, and you get into the identity that is right for you, where you didn't feel good in the gender you were born in, So you transition and you don't feel like you fit in the gender that you identify as, because you didn't have all of that experience growing up. You didn't have it beaten into your head. You just don't have that right perspective. So you just, that gray area where you feel like disconnected. And then from Bethany's perspective, the way it worked out is she appears now to be heteronormative, and on one hand seems to have eschewed her community, and people feel like, oh, you're just in a phase, but then you blend perfectly into cis normative society and have to prove your your queerness constantly to the gay community. And I just think that wow, those dynamics together play into making it for a really interesting emotional relationship.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Spot on.
Wow.
Complicated.
It's complicated.
Well, Bethany, I'm sorry that you have had to go through that because of this. Like, that must make it very difficult.
It's worth it.
It's worth it.
Well, he's worth it, right? Like,
Worth it.
But him.
I always say that it's a lot easier for me to date her than it is for her to date me.
Yeah, it's funny. Wow. That's fascinating. Thank you both so much for sharing that. And I can't wait to get Bethany back on. She made her need her own episode now. So, you mentioned early on, we're old. There wasn't even the term trans when this could have started for us. What was it like for you when you first started to seek out trans community? I know my personal experience, and why I like to ask this is there was a bit of a false start, and I wasn't ready for it, so I kind of had a backlash. And it took me a long time to be able to get back out there and find a community. When you first tried to find other people like you, what was that experience like?
I actually didn't. So I'm a little bit of an introvert. I don't really like people that much. It's hard. I get pretty bad like social anxiety, right? So I usually have to be pushed pretty hard to do things that are uncomfortable. And at the time, my therapist that I was seeing told me about this transgender camp out in central Massachusetts. It was just guys, trans dudes, right?
Ooh.
And I was like, what am I gonna do? Well, like, I'm just gonna go camping? Yeah, okay. So I went, and I met my best friend there, actually, that I'm still friends with now. That he basically, transitioned maybe like a month or two before me, but outside of that, I didn't have a community. I was like a loner in a way. I felt very self-absorbed in my transition. It was hard for me to have intimate relationships because I felt like I couldn't give the attention that is required to another person because I was so hyper-focused on myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about me, right? And what I needed to do in order to, and I think that's normal for when people are first transitioning, right? They're learning. It's brand new. When you're young, your family, your parents, they guide you. They guide you one way or the other of like, this is what boys do. This is what girls do. You dress like this. You play with these kind of things. And then you turn 25 years old, and it's basically like being dropped on the doorstep, right? With no supervision, no guidance whatsoever. And you're like, well, what the fuck do I do now? I don't have anybody showing me and teaching me how to be a man, right? And so I feel like what ends up happening a lot of the time, and I fell victim to it as well, is that what do, right? We look for role models. And we look for the machoist, the manliest of men in the media, right? Because we want to emulate that. We want to be seen as like a macho guy, right? And what better way, first of all, to I became a mechanic. What the most gender affirming career you could possibly think of. I chose a career that would like totally just like put me right in there. If I could pass in this career field, I will be okay in the world. And I was. But a problem that I find a lot of the time is people look up to these types of men that are very toxic, right? They exude toxicity, right? And they feel like that is what it takes. That is what being a man is like. And it's not. It is not. You could be masculine and not be toxic at the same time. And it's just it's eye opening. It's eye opening, and you don't always see it while you're in it. And I didn't see it until I grew up. And I look back on things and I was like, God, that was a really shitty thing that I did. I wish I had the role models that I am finding people are looking at me as on social media. They look at me as like, it's so good to see an older trans person. It makes me see that my life is going to turn out okay. I never had that. And it's mind blowing to me to be seen in that light.
Yeah.
It's humbling.
Mm-hmm. On that note, in transition, when you thought about it and started to put together who it was that you wanted to end up being, did you have a roadmap? And then as you went through, did your goals shift?
So I know this is going to sound really lame and cheesy. Okay. So I didn't have like some celebrity to look up to. I looked up to my dad, I always admired his courage and his strength and his wisdom, also his engagement in our lives. And all I ever wanted to do was be as good of a father as he was to me. And I try to do that for my kids now, and now that I have transitioned, he treats me in a way that I wish he had treated me when I was younger, as like his son, like he shows me things, that like, it's a little outdated, his thinking, my dad's like in his 70s, and so he's a little outdated with his philosophies and like stereotypical roles of men and women, right? But he definitely sees me. I feel seen by him, and he is a successful man in every area of his life, and I've always aspired to be that person, in my career, to be successful, to be in a successful marriage, to be happy in my life, to raise children correctly. I don't know if there's a correct way, to be honest with you, but to raise them, to the best that I can, to show them, every angle of life that is available to them, introduce them to different types of people, different families, and allow them to grow in any direction that they want. And I thank my dad for that immensely. And I've told him that many times.
It's interesting. Mimi brings up something. I don't think that this will resonate with you, but I'm just kind of curious in that, because as you set out to find role models, you found some toxic ones, but you also wanted to model yourself after your dad. Mimi mentions that one of the reasons she was pushed towards transition was she didn't want to end up like her dad, and I that's something that resonates with me. Just like, that's just that there was that example of what I absolutely knew I didn't want to become, and as I started thinking about identifying as transgender, that was actually a problem for me. That is it just that I reject masculinity in some way that that is kind of causing this? Like, is it sort of like an invalidating reason? Was there anything like that with you, with your relationship with your mother?
Oh, that's a good question.
No, I mean, I feel like I've also taken attributes of her with me along the way, for better or worse, right? My mother is an extremely strong woman. She was born in 1947, right after World War II in Germany, after my grandparents survived the Holocaust. They moved here when she was 5 years old to Manhattan, and they had to survive. My mother is a survivor, and she is strong. She is basically the glue that holds our family together. And I feel like, I never really saw her as somebody that like I didn't want to be, yeah, of course, like, physically, I didn't want to be like, and, I was the only girl of two boys, I was the only girl in the family. So of course my parents were like, hoping, that I would, have a family and birth my own children and do all that stuff, and, but they love me for who I am. And, I think my parents did a wonderful job raising all of us. I know that they would, may disagree if you ask them that question. But I definitely feel like I'm proud of my upbringing. I'm proud of, my having being fortunate to have so loving and accepting parents, as well as two wonderful brothers who are also very accepting, even though one of them is in a very strict religious sect of Judaism, which would not normally accept me.
That's
Sorry, I'm taking over your show.
no, of course not. No, I'm sorry. I just had so many things going on in my head. It's tough to figure out where to go with that. There's just so much. It's wonderful that your family has found that acceptance for you and the things that you've gone through. What were some of the fears that you ran into in your journey? I mean, you're doing this on your own without a roadmap, without a role model. What were the fears that you struggled with, and how did you overcome those to find your confidence and to move forward in your journey?
Wow. Fears that I had. They're probably not fears that a lot of people would consider to be fears. I think they were fears of like, having to do things on my own because it was uncomfortable, because, I'm an introvert and I don't like having to talk to people on the phone, doing this with you, this is like out of my comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I can't see the audience is a great help. If I saw the audience, it would be very difficult for me. But, I'm just feeling like it's just like you and I talking, I was fearful of that. I was fearful, of course, of like my parents not accepting me. Of course, that was a fear, but I knew my parents. I knew that, they would always love me. They always said that to me, that they would always love me no matter what. Okay. So I knew that they weren't going to be, not disappointed. They weren't going to be like disowning of me on any level. I was fearful of things that weren't proven to be successful, as far as like HRT. That is, we don't know what the long term effects are with testosterone or estrogen. Um, that is, that is why you have to go through all these hurdles, because they say it's not an FDA approved, method of treatment, right? And that there's no there's not enough science or research to be able to say like what the long-term effects will be. So of course, right, like everybody has fears, but those fears didn't outweigh, how I felt. Like I was willing to take on any risks that may have been presented to me because I didn't feel like I could physically live in this world without transitioning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the truth, and I'm so sad to hear the very common thread for a lot of trans folks, and that is that period of struggle that you had where before you were able to transition, before you even knew you were trans, of the self-harm and those, those really dark thoughts. Something that I definitely went through and experienced myself. And so, I mean, I'm just glad to see that we both made it to the other side of it, right?
Yeah, Emily, so do I. And it just kind of made me think of something. So I have a lot of tattoos on my body, right? And people always ask me, they're whole fascinated of like, can you give us a tattoo tour? Tell us what your tattoos mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, a lot of my tattoos cover up a lot of scars on my body that were there from doing a lot of self-harm. And I don't tell people that. I don't tell people that because I'm over it. It was a time in my life, and I don't want to be reminded of those awful dark years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that. I understand that completely. I just understand the importance of sitting like this where we're talking about what a journey looks like for a wide range of different trans folks, to help show other people that these feelings that you're having, the confusion, even down to the really dark stuff, is something that a lot of us go through. You're not alone. You're not unique. You're not a freak. There's nothing wrong with you. You just have to get to the point where you're living your true life, and it all just seems to open up, doesn't it?
It sure does. It sure does. And I also feel like transitioning is not the magic pill for curing all of your problems in life, which people think will. If you were depressed, if you had financial problems, if you had any kind of troubles in your life, they're still going to be there after you transition. And people feel like I constantly hear like, once I transition, everything will be fine, and for some, maybe it is, but for a lot of people, you get to a point where you're at the apex of your transition, and there, you have shit still in your life that you have to deal with now. Still, it didn't make it go away. I still have anxiety. I had anxiety before. I have anxiety still. I had depression before. I have it still.
Well, and that key point that, like I said, it's starting to come very front of mind for me, and it really brightly illuminated, is that idea that even once you transition, it's hard to just blend in. Medically, it's difficult to blend in with the gender you identify with. If you are one of the few lucky ones that are able to get there, feeling like you truly belong there is still something that's really hard to achieve, because you don't have those experiences. So it really in some ways kind of affects you in the same way that the dysphoria did before, of like, I'm not fitting in the same way, the way that I expect to, and you internalize that and say that there's something else wrong with me.
Absolutely, Emily. Absolutely. People don't understand. They cannot believe when I tell them that I still experience dysphoria. I do. I still experience dysphoria. Believe me, it is not like how it used to be. I don't have it every single day, but it does creep up on me. You guys only know me and see me like this. You didn't know me before I transitioned. Like, I could see underneath this beard. I could see my body. I could see who I was, and it still affects me. It's hard to believe, probably, for a lot of people, that when I say I could look in a mirror and still see a girl there looking back at me.
Yeah, that was a struggle. That was a tough one. And then I don't know about for you, but I got to this really strange point where, I would have that. I'd look in the, I'd put on a nice dress, full face of makeup, jewelry, everything. I'd look in the mirror and I'd see a dude. And then other times I'd wake up in the morning and I hadn't shaved for a day and a half. I had not even just like a 5 o'clock shadow. I had stubble and I looked like trash. And I'd walk past the mirror and I'd go, there she is. I would see Emily. Did you have moments like that where like, see, sort of even at what you felt was your worst, like you would finally see Corey?
Before TikTok, I never talked like this ever. It's kind of therapeutic for me. People don't normally come up to me and just like ask me questions, right? So I put myself out there on social media, and it's helpful for me, and it's actually given me a lot of more confidence than I had before. I feel seen. I feel like I'm connecting with people. I still have moments like that, Emily. I do. They are far in between, thankfully. But it's funny, right? It's funny that like in your worst moments is when like you see yourself in the most affirming way. It makes no sense one bit. And I cannot explain it. But then other times I will get like really dappered up, put on a suit, get dressed up, and I will feel so goddamn insecure. Like everybody's gonna know that I was once a girl, even though I'm like in a 3-piece suit with a tie. I look good, but then when I'm walking around in like a pair of gym shorts and like no shirt on, I'm just like fat hanging out everywhere. I'm just like, you look like a fucking hot dad, you know? Why is that? Why can't we feel comfortable in the image that we have in our head of how we want to look?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's not a cautionary tale because, we did talk about, or you did mention that transition doesn't fix everything in your life. It does fix the way everything feels, though. Like it does feel better, even in those times when you don't feel like you fit in completely. Like just you being feels better. And so that is the thing that makes transition worth it. And I think that yeah, even through all of this and even those moments of the dysphoria, that those dysphoria moments just kind of rock us back all the way to the beginning momentarily. But I think you're then quickly reminded of how blessed you are to be at this place, and it's so much better where you are now. And maybe those reminders are kind of nice of like, oh yeah, I've really made it a long way, haven't I?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And people ask me like, how do you deal with the dysphoria? And I try and do things in my life that I can do to eliminate it. One of the biggest forms of dysphoria that I had was having to self-inject myself with testosterone every 2 weeks. It was a constant reminder that I had to do this thing. And it kind of like always like punched me in the face when that happened. And so in order to mitigate that situation, I started to just use a different form of testosterone where I have implants done at a doctor's office. Mm-hmm. They're pellets that go under my skin that get changed out. That don't get changed out. They dissolve in every 4 to 5 months. And in my mind, I'm just going into the office to have a procedure done, and I don't have to worry or think about giving myself injections. And that eliminated that level of dysphoria. Wow, so whatever you can do, to make your life easier.
That's interesting. I had 1 month's worth of injections, and the problem was they were too expensive. The pills were just so cheap for me, and that financially it wasn't something that I wanted to keep doing. It was funny because there was something about it that felt super adult. Like I was like, giving yourself an injection. Like I'm practically a doctor now. Like I'm just, because I can handle needles. I can do the whole thing, and do the flicking and keep everything sterile and all that fun stuff.
You're so funny.
But yeah, there's something. I mean, it's it's so much more conscious. You're so much more aware of it. It's much more of a procedure. Whereas a pill, you take like, you're taking aspirin or any other thing, or, a lot of us have to take pills regularly anyways. So it's just not even a thing. And I do appreciate that perspective on find the ways to, to do those things that kind of let it slip into just the day to day, instead of bringing attention to the fact that I am transitioning and reminding yourself. I love that.
Absolutely.
So as we get towards the end of this section, and we're running quite a bit long, this is going to be a long show if you've got the time for it. I know it's late for y'all, but if you need to cut us off, let me know. I've got 3 final questions here for you. First off, is there anything that you feel you've been able to accomplish because of your transition?
I've been able to be seen more in my career. I guess that's the privilege that I walked into. I feel like I'm heard more, and that's not. It's not always a good thing, right? Because that is what we want to avoid in our culture. The standards of how men and women are treated. My opinions have not changed one bit, yet I am heard more. Mm-hmm. I don't really have much of a answer for your question.
Okay, that's fine. We've got 2 more, and then after the break, I've got so many more questions for you. So we'll get. There's lots to get into. Do you have a favorite thing that you have learned along your journey, either about yourself or about the world around you?
Favorite thing I've learned. I feel like I've learned how to properly integrate into society in a positive way. I've learned how to, talk to people that I may not have been able to in the past, to get my point across with things. I've learned patience. I've learned compassion for women. I see things in a way that a lot of cis men do not. I'm able to empathize with a lot of the struggles that women go through. And I guess that's what makes us trans men unique, and maybe desirable for women, because we understand what it's like, and we have that perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. As we close out this section of the show, what advice do you have to give to young or closeted trans folks out there?
Yeah, so I feel like the best advice to give would be to be kind to yourself, give yourself grace and patience, and enjoy the journey that you're on. Like I've said in the past, it's called a journey for a reason. And to just forgive yourself and allow yourself to feel everything that your body and your mind is going through, and that you're not alone. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you'll survive.